The attic smelled like lemon oil and winter dust, that dry, almost metallic scent of cardboard, old textiles, and memory. Eleanor Blake hadn't been up there in years, not since her Aunt Marian passed and left her the house. She hadn't wanted to come back. But the house, much like the past, has a way of waiting patiently for us to run out of excuses. She climbed the narrow stairs with a sigh and a small grunt. 74 wasn't what it used to be, and flicked on the hanging bulb. Its dull amber light revealed stacks of boxes, a cedar chest, a broken mirror, and one small bookcase tilted like it had leaned on someone once who never leaned back. Eleanor wasn't searching for anything in particular. She only meant to tidy, donate a few things, make room. But on the second shelf, tucked behind an old RCA radio, she saw it. A thick leather-bound album, worn at the spine and cracked at the corners. She brushed it off gently, sat on the floor with crossed legs like a child, and opened it. The pages smelled of powder and faint perfume. Black and white photographs and paper corners stared up at her. Somber people in wool coats, tight curls and gloved hands, smiles as stiff as their collars. She recognized a few. Her mother, Marian, younger than Eleanor had ever seen her. A man who might have been Uncle Glenn. Two girls near a fountain. A picnic scene with a paper lantern string. A woman on a porch, eyes shaded, her hand on a child's head. But then, a blank. One page had a rectangle where a photo had been, the yellowed outline unmistakable. The paper corners still clung to the edges. But the photo was gone. Cut out. Clean, like with sewing scissors. And beneath that empty space and faded pencil. Don't ask. They never found her. Eleanor sat very still. It was a strange thing, that sentence. It didn't sound angry. Just resigned. Like a rule passed down too many times to question. She flipped the page. The rest of the album continued, as if nothing had happened. Weddings, school photos, baby curls taped to the edges. But her eyes kept drifting back to that blank space. That missing girl. Who was she? And why had no one ever mentioned her? She looked inside the front cover. A note had been tucked behind the binding, brittle, yellowed, the ink bleached by time. It read, CS 1934. Transferred to St. Cecilia's. Initial intake under DH. Watch the stairs. M. Eleanor blinked. St. Cecilia's? She had never heard of it. The handwriting was definitely Aunt Marian's. Tight, slanted, slightly trembled, the same she'd used in birthday cards and grocery lists. She folded the note and placed it inside her sweater pocket. Downstairs, the kettle began to whistle. But Eleanor didn't move. Her hand rested on the page with the missing photo. The space where someone had been. The frame that was supposed to hold a face. And something inside her stirred. Something that said this wasn't just a curiosity. It was a piece of her family someone had worked hard to forget. Too hard. She stood slowly, carrying the album like it might shatter. The kettle had stopped on its own. She poured the tea, sat at the table, and opened her laptop. Searched. St. Cecilia's, Illinois Girls' Home, 1930s. No results. Then, St. Cecilia's Correctional Home? Still nothing. But then, in a small corner of a genealogy forum, St. Cecilia's operated under state contract for troubled girls in Cook County, closed 1941. File sealed. CDH number 44. She leaned back. Eyes narrowed. The same initials from the note. DH. And beneath it, one comment from a user with a blank profile photo. They used to say some girls went in and never came out. My grandmother called it the house that stole names. Eleanor didn't sleep much that night. But when she finally closed her eyes, the empty frame burned behind her lids like a missing name she was suddenly responsible for finding. The Cook County Historical Archive was tucked behind a library no one used anymore. The kind with microfilm reels, dusty ceiling fans, and drawers that still squeaked with the secrets of people long gone. Eleanor hadn't been there in years, not since researching her husband's service record for his obituary. But today, she walked in with a different weight on her shoulders. A woman behind the counter, gray braid, magnifying glasses hung around her neck, looked up from a yellowing ledger. "Can I help you?" she asked. Eleanor held up a small note. "I'm looking for anything related to St. Cecilia's. Around 1934. Possibly Cook County jurisdiction." The woman didn't blink. But something flickered. "Who told you about that place?" "No one," Eleanor said honestly. "But I think someone in my family was sent there. And no one ever spoke of her again." The woman stared at her a moment longer, then stood. "Come with me." They walked through rows of cabinets and war records until they reached a door marked Archive B. Restricted material. The woman unlocked it with an old brass key and stepped inside. The room was colder, windowless, lined with steel shelving and unlabeled boxes. She pulled one, labeled in pencil. DH Files, Girls Institutions 1929 to 1939. DH stands for Department of Hygiene, she explained. It was the euphemism Illinois used when the state funded homes for girls they deemed improper. Eleanor raised her eyebrow. Improper meant what exactly? The woman gave a dry, knowing smile. Pregnant, poor, or just too stubborn. She opened the box and began flipping through brittle file folders. One bore a stamp. St. Cecilia's Training Home, Chicago Heights. Technically, the woman said, St. Cecilia's didn't exist. Not in the way we define it now. It was operated by the Sisters of Mercy but funded partially through a state moral rehabilitation grant. Most of the records were sealed after 1941 when the last investigation vanished. Eleanor felt her pulse slow. What investigation? The woman hesitated, then pulled out a single-page report. 1939 Internal Review, DH 44. Allegations of excessive punishment, malnourishment, and unsanctioned transfers. Records incomplete. Facility deemed unfit for continued oversight. Recommended, quiet closure. Archives returned to diocese custody or destroyed. Eleanor read the last line twice. Final status, non-existent. How can something be non-existent after housing dozens of girls? The woman tapped the folder. Because silence was easier. She handed Eleanor a photocopy of a 1935 intake ledger, badly faded. A list of names, ages, towns. But halfway down the page, Eleanor saw it. CS, age 16, admitted March 2nd, 1934, for insubordination. No release date. Her breath caught. What's this? She asked, pointing to the initials scrawled beside it. P.S.17. The woman frowned. That's a classification code. Not for a facility, but a status. She flipped through another box and pulled out a red card with block letters. P.S.17. Probationary silence, class 17. Do not correspond. Do not archive. They used that for girls who caused disruption, the woman explained. Outspoken, defiant, unwilling to conform. Some were transferred. Others were made quiet. Eleanor sat heavily on the nearby bench. Why would my aunt keep that picture hidden? Why would she write "don't ask"? Because people did ask, the woman said softly. And what they found scared them. So they buried it. With time. With silence. With scissors. Eleanor folded the photocopy and placed it gently into her purse. Thank you, she said. The woman nodded. There may still be a trace left. The Sisters of Mercy moved their records to a private convent outside Joliet. If anything survived, it's there. As Eleanor walked out of the archive, winter light fell in slanted bars across the library steps. The wind carried the scent of snow, but her hands were warm, clenched tightly around a name. CS. Someone had tried to erase her. Now Eleanor knew where to look next. The convent was tucked behind a line of barren oaks, 2 miles outside Joliet, its red brick walls softened by ivy and time. The bell in the chapel tower rang just once every hour now, more out of tradition than purpose. Most of the sisters had moved on, passed on, or simply aged out. But one remained. Sister Regina met Eleanor at the entrance, small-framed, white-haired, sharp-eyed. Her hands were folded beneath the sleeves of a thick wool cardigan. She looked at Eleanor the way someone looks at a question they've heard before, but never quite answered. You called yesterday, the nun said. About St. Cecilia's. Eleanor nodded. Come in, Regina said quietly. They walked through a long corridor that smelled of wood polish, candles, and faint lavender. A few doors remained labeled, infirmary, kitchen, chapel, but most were unmarked. Just echoes of purpose. Regina stopped before a wooden door marked archive, private. She unlocked it, turned on a dim lamp, and gestured toward the shelves lining the walls. These are what we salvaged after the closure. Most were supposed to be returned to the state. Some never made it. She moved toward a low cabinet and pulled out a box marked 1933 to 1935, correspondence/personal. You'll want this one. Eleanor sat carefully and opened the lid. Inside were envelopes, brittle, yellowed, curled at the edges. Some sealed, some opened and stamped unsent, others tied with ribbon. The paper whispered when touched. She sorted through dozens. And then, halfway down the stack, she found it. To whomever remembers me. CS, April 1934 inch. The ink had faded, but the script was graceful. Composed. Not the handwriting of someone afraid, but of someone determined not to vanish. She opened it gently and read, "My name is Clara Sutton. I am 16. I don't know if this letter will ever leave this place. They don't let us send them anymore. But if someone finds it, if anyone is still listening, please remember me. I wasn't wicked. I wasn't broken. I was just angry. I said no when I was supposed to say yes. I stayed out late. I wore red lipstick. I took a train to see the lake without permission. That was enough. They shaved our hair when we arrived. Said vanity was a sin. Gave us numbers instead of names. I am 27 now. Not by age, but by dress, by duty, by daily roll call. Some girls scream at night. Some whisper to the walls. Others fold into themselves and forget they were ever real. But I won't. If you find this letter, and I am not in your records, know that I lived. I read poetry. I loved finches. I remembered the shape of my sister's hands. Please, don't forget who I was." Eleanor's hands trembled. The room felt too still. The lamp hummed softly. Sister Regina sat across from her, quiet, watching. "She wrote this before the transfers began," Regina said. "Some of the girls were sent to private homes. Others disappeared altogether. We weren't told where. We weren't supposed to ask." Eleanor folded the letter, gently, reverently. "There's no mention of what happened to Clara?" The nun shook her head. No record of a release. No date of death. Just a missing page. Eleanor closed the box and placed the letter in her satchel. "She deserves to be remembered," she said. Regina nodded. "Some of them left behind more. Names scratched into walls. Ribbons hidden under floorboards. One girl carved a bird into her bunk post." Eleanor stood slowly. Clara loved finches. She did. As she stepped out into the cold afternoon light, the wind stirred the bare branches overhead. A single brown leaf spun in the air, then dropped quietly at her feet. She looked up at the sky. "Clara," she whispered, "I hear you." And for the first time, she didn't feel alone. The address listed in the oldest ledger no longer existed. Street names had changed. Buildings had been razed or paved over. But using the 1934 fire insurance map Sister Regina had shown her, and a local librarian's recollection of a collapsed church on Bellamy Road, Eleanor found it. Or what was left of it. She parked beside a rusted chain-link fence, nearly swallowed by vines. The sidewalk beyond it led to a plot of overgrown ground, hemmed in by warehouses and dumpsters. But in the center, the land dipped, as if something heavy had once sat there, and the earth had never fully recovered. She stepped through a tear in the fence, shoes crunching on gravel, dried leaves, and broken glass. There it was, a rectangular outline in crumbling stone, the foundation of St. Cecilia's Home for Girls. Trees had grown up through the floor, their roots thick with time. Bits of glass still clung to rusted window frames. A row of bricks bore soot marks, blackened by what could have been fire, or simply time's refusal to forget. Eleanor walked slowly along the western edge, where the outer wall had partially collapsed. She scanned the stone. Then she saw them. Initials. Carved into the mortar between bricks. CS. MR. HD. Number 27. Number 31. Finch. Some were barely visible. Others dug deep, angry and deliberate. There were symbols too strange, repeated over and over, a small triangle with 3 dots. A circle with a line through it. And beside one, scratched in faint script. This was ours. Eleanor knelt beside the largest stone, where the initials were clearest. C.S. Clara Sutton. She ran her fingers across the rough carving, whispering the name. Then she noticed a large slab near the far corner, flat, heavy, moss-covered. Unlike the rest, it hadn't shifted. She pried at the edge with a metal ruler from her satchel. The slab gave with a groan, tilting just enough to reveal a hollow beneath, and inside, a small canvas-bound notebook, wrapped in oilcloth. Still dry. Still waiting. She opened it carefully. The first page was blank. The second. P.S.17. Final list. Transfer group. Below were lines of initials, handwritten, without dates. C.S. J. L.R. N.D. Number 44, mute. Number 53, sick. Number 61, refused. Some had small marks beside them. Others had only the number. At the bottom of the page. Transferred without record. No family notified. Names never to be used again. Eleanor sat back, the cold stone pressing against her spine. She'd read of places like this. Facilities that didn't file releases. Girls reclassified as untraceable. Disappearances marked not by absence, but by red tape and silence. She flipped to the final page. One line had been written in larger, uneven script, the ink smudged. They told us forgetting was the price of freedom. But silence is not peace. She closed the notebook and held it close. In the distance, traffic hummed, the world moving on. But here, in this forgotten patch of earth, Eleanor heard something else, the weight of things unsaid. Of stories buried too deep. Of girls who had carved names into brick because paper was not safe. She looked down at the initials once more, then whispered to the weeds. Clara, I found you. Finding the name MR, the second on the transfer list from the notebook, took 2 days of slow research. County directories, census rolls, archived obituaries. But Eleanor found her. Martha Rayner, born 1919, Evanston. Committed in 1934. No death record. No marriage. No burial listed. Only a line in a 1935 intake log. Transferred to religious institutional custody. One other clue, a 1998 phone directory listing in Elmhurst, Illinois. Rayner J. It was a long shot. But long shots had become Eleanor's specialty. The house was a small, tidy cottage tucked at the end of Thistle Lane. Ivy curled along the porch. The mailbox leaned slightly to one side. When Eleanor knocked, the door opened slowly. The woman who stood behind it looked to be in her 80s, slender, upright, eyes like faded sea glass. You must be here about Martha, she said, not unkindly. Not surprised. Eleanor nodded. You're Josephine? Yes. She stepped aside. Come in. If we're going to talk about my sister, we might as well sit properly. The living room was quiet and neat, filled with soft light and worn wood. On the mantel, a photo in a silver frame. 2 girls on a swing, maybe 7 and 10. One with thick curls, the other with a boyish haircut and a gaze that didn't quite belong to childhood. That's her, Josephine said. That was before they sent her away. Eleanor laid the photocopy of the transfer list on the table. MR, Martha Rayner. She's here. Josephine's hand trembled as she touched the page. She wrote me once, she said softly. 1 letter. Said they might send her south of the wall. She told me if she vanished, I was to remember the clearing past the south fence. She said I'd know it by the crescent stone. Eleanor stared at her. Do you remember where that was? Josephine stood. Her movements were slow, but her memory sharp. She returned with a small, cloth-bound notebook. A child's scrawl on the front. For Martha, if she goes missing. Inside, taped to the back cover, was a hand-drawn map. Faint pencil lines. A broken trail. A crescent-shaped rock. A marked X in the trees. I never got to go, Josephine said. I was 10. They told me to stop asking. That I was upsetting my mother. But I kept this. Eleanor looked at the map. It was simple, crude, and likely the last thing Martha had ever passed to her sister. Will you come with me? She asked gently. Josephine shook her head. I've carried this long enough. You found the names. You walk the rest. Eleanor squeezed her hand. I promise. I'll find her. As she drove away, Josephine stood at the window, one palm pressed to the glass. She did not wave, but something in her face, quiet, solemn, unblinking, felt like permission. The woods behind the old convent were denser than Eleanor expected. Not wild exactly, but tangled in a way that suggested no one had truly passed through in years. Saplings grew crooked where fences had once stood. Brambles snatched at her sleeves like they remembered. The map was simple. Follow the broken wall, cross the stream, look for the crescent-shaped rock, and then, the clearing. It took longer than she planned. Her breath grew shallower. Her legs ached. But she pressed on. Because somewhere out here, someone was still waiting. At last, she saw it. A pale boulder rising from the earth like a moon-frozen madrice, curved on one edge and cracked through the center. The crescent stone. She circled it, just as the map had indicated, and pushed past a row of leaning pine trunks. Then she stopped. The ground ahead opened into a wide clearing, no larger than a backyard. At first it looked like nothing, just moss and brittle grass. But then her eyes adjusted, and she saw them. Crosses. Dozens of them. All made of rough, untreated wood. Most were crooked, some broken. A few were no more than 2 nailed sticks fallen sideways. No names. No dates. No flowers. Only numbers carved with dull blades. Number 18. Number 26. Number 44, mute. Number 53. Number 61, refused. Eleanor stepped carefully between them. Her boots pressed into soft earth. The air here was still, too still. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. She read each number aloud, softly, like prayers or apologies. And then she saw it, a cross near the far edge, half swallowed by a thicket of ivy. Unlike the others, this one had been burned. Someone had used heat to mark it, not blade. The inscription. Her name was Clara. She loved finches. Eleanor fell to her knees. No surname, no birth year, but it was enough. It was a refusal to forget. It was a voice, however faint, speaking through time. She reached out and touched the wood, which gave slightly beneath her fingers, damp with age. She didn't cry, but her throat burned. From her satchel, she took the oilcloth notebook, the letter, and a small photograph she'd copied from the archives. It showed a girl with soft eyes and a wary smile. Clara Sutton, 16, missing since 1934. She laid them gently at the base of the cross. "You're not gone," she whispered. "Not to me." A breeze lifted through the clearing, and for the first time, she heard a bird, a clear, simple chirp from the branches above. A finch. Just one. It sang once, then flew on. The sun had already dipped below the tree line by the time Eleanor reached her car. The walk back had been slower than the way in, not from exhaustion, but from reverence. Every step away from the clearing felt like a promise, to remember, to speak, to never let silence win again. That night, back in her home, she sat at the kitchen table in the soft lamplight, the photo album open before her. The same page, the same missing square, the same faded pencil note. Don't ask. They never found her. But now Eleanor knew better. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the newly printed photograph, Clara Sutton, age 16. The image was grainy, a copy of a copy, but her face was unmistakable. Quiet strength. A softness around the eyes that hadn't yet been taken from her. Eleanor slid the photo into the empty corner tabs of the album. It fit, like it had always belonged there. She uncapped a pen. Beneath the image, she wrote, Clara Sutton, 1918 to 1934. She loved finches. She was never just a number. She stared at the words for a long time, then turned to her laptop. She opened a blank document, titled it The Girl in the Missing Frame, and began to type. The whole story from attic to archive, from carved initials to nameless graves. She included every detail, the transfer lists, the fake designations, the voices that had tried to speak from behind stone and paper. When she finished, she submitted it to the local historical society, along with scanned documents and an email that simply read, "This girl had a name. She deserves to be remembered." She wasn't sure if anyone would read it, but that didn't matter, because the act of telling was, in itself, a kind of resurrection. She printed a copy and folded it inside the front cover of the album. Tomorrow, she would call her daughter and tell her everything. About Clara, about Marion, about the silence that had shaped their family like a bruise. But tonight, she stood at the window, holding the photo in her hands one last time, and spoke the name aloud. Clara Sutton. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't shake the earth, but it settled something long unsettled. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and in the distance, just faintly, a bird sang.